Hello and welcome to this Literature Revision System lesson on Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnet 29, I Think of Thee, for AQA GCSE Literature. If you've seen the introduction to the Literature Revision System lessons on AQA 11 Relationships Poetry, you know that this is a key poem because we'll link the other 7 romantic poems in the cluster to this one. So it's really important you start your revision of the cluster with this poem. It may also be of use for you to refer to the vocab lesson for this poem that's also attached to the website. You can find the link below. So, context. Making thoughtful comments on a different context for the poetry will help you pick up marks in the exams, so the lessons will always start with a few key points on context. For example, for Sonnet 29, Browning chose to use the sonnet form, which is traditionally been used for romantic poetry, so it establishes that love genre from the get-go. This is a very personal expression of emotion. Browning fell in love with Robert Browning against her father's wishes. The sonnet was part of a series written during the time of her secret courtship and marriage and was not intended for publication. So it's a very private poem. She was a devout Christian, and this sonnet uses biblical imagery like much of her poetry. She believed Christianity was poetry glorified, so this poem is an example of how she would it kind of unifies as her excitement of being in love, her love of poetry, and her belief in God. Okay, I'll then read the text to you, so I'll try not to kill the poem. I think of thee, my thoughts do twine and bud about thee as wild vines about a tree, put out broad leaves, and soon there's naught to see except the straggling green which hides the wood. Yet, O my palm tree, be it understood, I will not have my thoughts instead of thee, who art dearer, better. Rather, instantly renew thy presence as a strong tree should. Rustle thy boughs, and set thy trunk all bare, and let these bands of greenery which enspear thee drop heavily down, burst shattered everywhere. Because in this deep joy to see and hear thee, and breathe within thy shadow a new air, I do not think of thee, I am too near thee. So a summary of the poem. I'm going to summarise the content after the reading. So the speaker compares her feelings of love and desire to a vine growing around a tree. The tree symbolises the man she loves, and her passion and excitement grows, and by the end she celebrates being with her beloved. Okay, if you've watched the introduction to the literature revision system, you may remember that we'll focus on 3 ideas from each poem, the beginning, middle and end essentially. From those we'll construct a full analysis. So in Sonnet 29 we'll focus on the quotation twine and bud. That will be the basis for our first paragraph. The second key analysis will be on my palm tree, a strong tree, linking that arboreal, that tree imagery, strong tree, set thy trunk all bare, and also the pronouns thine and thee. Final paragraph of analysis will focus on the end of the poem, and in this case the quotation will be drop heavily down, burst shattered everywhere, and a new air. So if you've got a copy of the poem or your anthology, I would suggest that you highlight those different quotations and then use the next few slides to help you make some detailed annotations, which will help you become familiar with the vocabulary we're going to use and also to connect quotations to the explanations. So I'll pause as I do the explanations so that you can add your annotations to your own copy of the poem. Okay, so point 1, we're looking at twine and bud. So hopefully you've highlighted that. And essentially you can use the notes that I've got on the page there in the handwritten text to make your own annotations. So Browning begins by describing the intensity of her feelings with organic metaphors. Twine and bud. These are images from nature that suggest her love is natural, that her physical desire is natural. Together with the traditionally feminine image of a bud, it creates a sensual tone and conveys her natural need to connect to the man she loves, emotionally. But there may also be a physical sexual subtext here, as the verb twine suggests her desire to intertwine her body with his, emotionally and physically. And as I mentioned, the word bud, using the image of a flower, has traditionally been used to represent female sexuality. So for Victorians, an explicit description of sexual desire would have been taboo. So Browning uses this figurative language to convey her personal, private feelings. Okay, moving on to point 2. The second key analysis of the sonnet again focuses on Browning's use of natural imagery. She uses an extended metaphor of a tree growing to characterize the masculinity of the man she loves. The masculine images of strength implied by a strong tree are complemented by the exotic image of his being her palm tree, which also creates imagery of deserts and oases, and that perhaps her life would be empty, barren like a desert without him. And again, we may interpret a sexual subtext in Browning's imagery. The words tree and trunk might be read as phallic symbols. Images suggest a penis. Obviously, this sexual symbolism would have been shocking and taboo for Victorians, so the repeated use of archaic pronouns, thee and thy, create a biblical tone. It's the language of Christian prayer, and so sanctifies her desire. It makes it something pure and sacred. Okay, the final analysis focuses on the climax of the sonnet as Browning describes her joy and excitement about being close to the man she loves, about being free to be with him. Remember, she wrote this poem in secret. Her family, or rather her father, was against the marriage, and so she was looking forward to being with Browning, and this ending the poem celebrates that sense of being released and being free. We could also think of it as a physical release as well, if we're looking at that sexual subtext of the poem. The language we're going to focus on here, the drop heavily down, burst shattered everywhere, it's quite muscular. It uses repeated what are called plosive consonants, the B and D sounds in drop heavily down and burst. This conveys her almost like explosive release, her desire. The poem's regular iambic rhythm. Now that's a rhythm created by pairs of syllables, unstressed and stressed syllables, common to the sonnet form. But here that rhythm is broken, and it reinforces the sense of escape, the sense of release. Also, the exclamation marks. They're repeated. This exclamatory punctuation is used throughout the poem, and it adds to this sense of physical urgency. Finally, the metaphor of a new air celebrates her feelings of freedom, a feeling of being alive that love gives her. Okay, so if you've seen the introduction to the literature revision systems, you may remember how we'll use a consistent framework that meets the requirements of the marked scheme, and that can be remembered through using the PETAL acronym, where we're going to point out the context for a quotation, we'll evidence the quotation, we'll use terminology accurately, we'll analyse the method used and develop that explanation, perhaps by then finally linking to another quotation or even to the other poem. So if we look at our notes around the opening of Sonnet 29, we can use that to construct a paragraph of analysis. Browning begins by describing the intensity of her feelings with the organic metaphors twine and bud. These feminine images suggest both a natural need to connect to the man she loves emotionally, but there may also be a physical sexual subtext here, as the verb twine suggests her desire to intertwine her body with his, and bud references the floral symbolism that traditionally has been used to represent female sexuality. So that paragraph of analysis, it meets the requirements of the marked scheme at the top end. It's a thoughtful examination of the use of language in the poem. So if we apply that PETAL acronym, the point, the evidence, the technique, the analysis and the link, we can then deconstruct the paragraph using that framework. The literature revision system worksheets use this framework and uniform colour coding to help you learn this detailed form of analysis. The analytical paragraph can be broken down then into chunks to make them easier to understand and learn. So it's the same PETAL steps, but they are separated and chunked into ultimately a chart form to give you a step-by-step guide. and a step-by-step process that you can follow and learn. So that's an example of the same paragraph now broken down into those chunks, broken down into that chart form. And lots of the exercises in the literature revision system will help you develop familiarity and knowledge, and therefore analytical skills, by using this chart form. And this is the full essay, all 3 paragraphs presented in this chart format. It meets the requirements of the mark scheme as a thoughtful examination. This analysis then needs to be linked to other poems in the cluster that also communicate romantic love. The detail and the frequency of those comparisons will determine the attainment from grade 7 to 9. So for a grade 7, we're going to begin with a comparative introduction. We'll then use that Sonnet 29 analysis, that basic essay structure, and then we'll complete the essay by linking that to the ending of the other poem, one of the other romantic love poems. And there are exercises to help you become familiar with that structure in the exclusive ebook. For grade 8, it's the similar structure, but now we're building in one other comparison. So the comparisons become increasingly detailed, there's more integrated. And again, resources for grade 8 essay structure and grade 8 knowledge base are in the workbook. And then finally, grade 9, it uses the same core of grade 7 and of the grade 8 analysis, but adds in yet more detail. So we can be confident that would be a top grade, in fact top marks analysis. So if you found this presentation useful, please like and be sure to check the next lessons. Also, all lessons and resources, including the vocab lessons, can be found on the website, links below. Thanks for attending Literature Revision Systems.